Hi. So, in general, the second lecture is devoted to proper methods of sampling. But before we proceed to discussing sampling, it would be useful to discuss the difference between population and sample and why we need to pay so much attention to the proper method of sampling. So, let's start with definitions. In general, population is a complete set of numerical information in which you are interested as a researcher. However, sample is an observed subset of population values. So this is the part of population regarding which you actually have this numerical information. So let's discuss some examples. Imagine that your research is devoted to behavior of international students, students from countries other than Poland, who study in Poland. As far as I remember, as for 2021, there were a couple of... Okay, so there was quite a significant number of those students, and obviously, as a researcher, you wouldn't be able to survey all the international students studying in Poland. It will take you too much time, it will be too expensive, so for obvious reasons, it's impossible. So in this case, probably you will survey Lazarski University international students, because in Lazarski University you actually have a chance to collect some information. So even though you're interested in all the international students in Poland, you are able to survey only part of them. So in this case, your sample is Lazarski University students. Imagine that you are willing to assess, let's say, number of children among working females. So obviously it would be quite useful to survey all the working females, because this will make your theory as general as possible, as representative as possible. However, because you are located in Warsaw, you might only survey females who work in Warsaw. So even though your population consists of all the working females, you can only survey females working in Warsaw, who will constitute your research sample. Imagine that you want to analyze some very general theory about decision-making process. So in this case, your population consists of all the people who are able to make a decision regarding some issue. Who have legal right to do so, and so on and so forth. However, you can only survey those people who are willing to participate in your experiment. So obviously, they will constitute your sample. So as you can see, sample is always smaller than population by definition, and you are rarely able to assess the entire population. That's why in statistics, in any kind of social science and in applied statistical analysis, we usually base our analysis on samples rather than populations. And when it comes to selecting the proper sample, so imagine that this frame is your entire population. You have people of different age, you have people of different preferences, you have people of different income. And imagine that regardless of the variable you choose, the color of the dot represents a different value of the variable. So let's concentrate on income. So let's say blue dot represents people with the lowest income and red dot represents people with the highest income. So this is your population. As we discussed before, typically population is too big in order to fully assess it. That's why you concentrate on some sample. And imagine that this circle represents your sample. And as you can see, it's not a representative one. So normally, you would like to include people of the different level of income. or let's say people of different preferences, or people with different cultural background. But if you pick only observations within this circle, you will completely miss the vast majority of observations. So you will concentrate only on people with average and high level of income. Obviously, any of your conclusions would not be relevant. They will be biased. Because in this case, you will only analyze, I don't know, behavior or preferences of people with a relatively high level of income. And this is the reason why we actually need different sampling methods and why it is so important to maintain the rigorous methodology when it comes to sampling. By the way, regardless of the study you are conducting, whether it is a report or your project or, I don't know, your diploma thesis, in methodology, you always describe the method of sampling. You explain how you selected those particular observations you use for your statistical analysis out of the entire population. And here you can find a very generic strategy for selecting a sample. First of all, you have to define your target population. So you have to decide on which particular characteristics you want to concentrate in your research. For instance, if you analyze consumer behavior of relatively young people, it makes no sense to include relatively old people to your sample, because those observations are simply not relevant for your research. On the other hand, if you discuss some general theory about consumer behavior, you would like to include both old and young people to your sample. If you concentrate only on females, it makes no sense to analyze male respondents, and so on and so forth. So first of all, you have to decide what kind of target population is relevant for your research at the very first place. The second step is selecting sample frame. So this is something we are going to discuss a little bit later. Then you have to choose sampling technique, and there are two broad types of them, which are probability sampling and non-probability sampling. So this is something we are to discuss in the next videos as well. You have to determine the sample size. And here I have to discuss something which might be not fully understandable yet, but I promise you will realize it when we proceed to the notion of statistical significance. But in general, in statistics and econometrics as well, more is better. So if you have more observations, you have more degrees of freedom, and consequently, it will be easier for you to test your research hypothesis. However, there is another side of the problem, because of course more is better, but it's hard to determine how big your sample should be exactly. So in this case, we frequently use some rules of thumb. In general, in statistics, the minimum number of observations is 30, and starting from 100, so it's something more reasonable. Of course, if you conduct a very massive research with many subgroups and categories, you have to include more observations. But let's say 100 is something reasonable. So the minimum number should be equal to 100. There is no justification except for the rule of thumb, so you have to trust me. Like, this is the only thing you can do at this point. And finally, you collect the data. So I hope it's clear now when it comes to population sample and the importance of proper sampling method. So in the next videos, we are going to discuss two main types of sampling techniques, which are probability and non-probability sampling. So thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.